That little thing? You actually spent money on this, my son-in-law Derek said with a laugh loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. A few people chuckled awkwardly. Others stared down at their plates. I simply smiled and folded the tissue paper back into the gift box. Derek had no idea that 3 days earlier, I had signed a document removing him from my $2 million will. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, 69 years old, a widow, a mother, and until recently, a woman who believed gratitude mattered. The party was being held at a beautiful restaurant overlooking Lake Travis outside Austin, Texas. Rachel, my daughter, had reserved a private room for Derek's 44th birthday celebration. Warm lights hung from exposed wooden beams. A chocolate layer cake sat on a decorated table near the windows. The lake reflected the orange glow of the setting sun. Everything looked perfect. That was probably why the moment felt so sharp. I had spent weeks searching for Derek's gift. Not because it was expensive. It wasn't. The gift cost less than $30. But it meant something. Years ago, when Rachel first introduced him to our family, he told me about an old pocket compass his grandfather had carried during fishing trips. He spoke about it for nearly an hour. His eyes lit up when he described it. When I found a restored vintage compass at a local antique shop, I thought of that conversation immediately. I remembered because that is what I always did. I remembered birthdays, favorite meals, little stories people told once and forgot. I wrapped the compass carefully in navy blue paper and tied it with a silver ribbon. I even included a handwritten note wishing him health, happiness, and many years of adventure with my daughter. When he opened the box, he stared at it for 2 seconds before laughing. "A compass," he said. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Rachel forced a smile. "Mom was just trying to be thoughtful," she said quietly. Derek shook his head. "I thought maybe it was something useful." Then he set the gift aside and reached for another package. Just like that. 30 seconds. That was all it took to dismiss a gesture that had come from the heart. I sat quietly and watched the celebration continue around me. The music played softly. Waiters carried trays of food between tables. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed. But something inside me felt strangely calm. Not angry, not hurt, just clear. The truth often arrives that way. Not like a storm. More like a window finally opening after years of stale air. As Derek laughed with his friends and accepted expensive gifts from coworkers, I found myself remembering dozens of small moments from the past decade. Moments I had ignored. Moments I had explained away. The time he joked that older people should stop giving advice because nobody listened anyway. The Christmas when he thanked everyone for their gifts except me. The family barbecue where he introduced me as the bank of Grandma Eleanor because I had helped Rachel and him with a down payment years earlier. Each memory had seemed minor on its own. Together, they formed a picture I could no longer pretend not to see. Across the room, Derek raised a glass and began talking about future plans. A bigger house, a luxury boat, early retirement. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed life would continue rewarding him forever. I listened quietly. Then I glanced toward the window where the last sunlight disappeared beyond the lake. 3 days earlier, my lawyer had asked if I was absolutely certain about changing my will. I had answered without hesitation. Sitting there at Derek's birthday party, watching him laugh at a gift chosen with genuine care, I knew I had made the right decision. The dinner ended a little after 9 that evening. One by one, guests gathered their coats, exchanged hugs, and made their way toward the parking lot. Derek stood near the entrance laughing with 2 coworkers while Rachel helped the restaurant staff pack leftover cake into containers. I remained seated for a few extra minutes, watching the lights shimmer across the dark surface of the lake. The room had grown quieter. The celebration was over, but the feeling it left behind lingered. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how strange disappointment becomes with age. When I was younger, painful moments felt sharp and immediate. At 69, they felt different. They settled quietly into places that had already been worn smooth by time. My house sat on 3 acres just outside Austin. It was not extravagant, but it was comfortable. My late husband, Charles, and I had lived there for nearly 30 years. Every tree on the property held a memory. Every room carried traces of a life we had built together. When I unlocked the front door that night, the familiar silence greeted me. I slipped off my shoes, set my purse on the hallway table, and turned on the lamp beside the living room window. The soft yellow light filled the space. For the first time all evening, I could hear my own thoughts. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. Then I sat at the small wooden table Charles had built with his own hands decades earlier. The house felt peaceful, yet as I stared into the steam rising from the mug, memories began appearing one after another. I remembered the first time Derek asked me for financial help. Rachel had called late one evening. They were struggling with a down payment for their first home. Charles and I did not hesitate. We wanted them to start their marriage with stability. We contributed nearly $40,000. Derek thanked us repeatedly back then. He called us generous. He called us family. Years later, when they wanted to renovate their kitchen, I helped again. When their air conditioning system failed during a Texas heat wave, I helped again. When unexpected medical bills arrived, I helped again. I never kept score. That is what family does, or at least that is what I believed. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Old habits are difficult to break. I carried a cup of coffee onto the back porch and watched the sky slowly brighten above the oak trees. Birds moved between branches. A gentle breeze stirred the grass. It should have been an ordinary morning. Instead, I found myself replaying small moments I had ignored for years. Derek rarely called unless he needed something. He rarely asked questions about my life. Conversations always seemed to circle back to money, investments, property values, or future plans. I began noticing a pattern I had spent years excusing. The realization was uncomfortable, but it was impossible to avoid. Around noon, Rachel called. Her voice sounded cheerful. She thanked me for attending the party and said everyone had enjoyed themselves. I listened quietly. Then she mentioned that Derek was already talking about another family gathering later in the year. I almost smiled. The confidence in her voice told me neither of them suspected anything had changed. Neither of them knew that the future Derek imagined so easily no longer existed. After we ended the call, I walked into my home office and opened a folder resting inside the top drawer of my desk. The paperwork sat exactly where I had left it 3 days earlier. I looked at the signature on the final page. Then I closed the folder and returned it to the drawer. Outside, the afternoon sun poured across the yard. Inside, for the first time in many years, I felt something unexpected. Not revenge, not satisfaction, certainty. Over the next few days, life appeared to return to normal, at least on the surface. Rachel sent photographs from a weekend brunch. Derek posted pictures online of a new golf outing with friends. Anyone looking from the outside would have seen an ordinary family moving through ordinary routines. Yet something had changed inside me. Once a person sees a pattern clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee it. The following Thursday, I attended my granddaughter Emily's school concert. She was 14 now, bright, thoughtful, and far more observant than most adults realized. The auditorium was crowded with parents and grandparents finding seats beneath fluorescent lights. I arrived early and settled into the third row. A few minutes later, Rachel and Derek entered together. Derek spotted me and waved. His smile was friendly enough. It always was when other people were watching. During the concert, I found myself paying attention not only to the children on stage, but also to the people sitting around me. Families leaned toward one another. They shared programs. They whispered encouragement. They celebrated small moments together. Watching them brought back memories of earlier years when Charles was still alive. We never had enormous wealth. We built our life carefully, one decision at a time. What we valued most was respect. Not perfection, not success, respect. After the performance ended, Emily hurried over and wrapped her arms around me. She thanked me for attending. Then she quietly showed me a certificate she had earned for academic achievement. Her eyes sparkled with pride. I congratulated her and told her how proud her grandfather would have been. For a moment, everything felt simple and genuine. Then I noticed Derek speaking with another parent nearby. He did not realize I could hear him. They were discussing retirement plans, investments, future expenses. Derek laughed and said, "Fortunately, family planning makes those things easier." The other man nodded without understanding what he meant. Derek never mentioned names, but something about the confidence in his voice caught my attention. He spoke as though certain resources would eventually become available to him, as though the future had already been guaranteed. The comment lasted only seconds, but it lingered with me during the drive home. That evening, I pulled an old photo album from a shelf in my study. Dust floated through the beam of a nearby lamp as I turned the pages. There was Rachel at 8 years old learning to ride a bicycle. There was Charles teaching her how to fish at Lake Buchanan. There was our family gathered around holiday tables long before Derek entered our lives. I sat there for nearly an hour looking through those photographs. The memories were warm, but they also revealed something I had ignored for too long. Every meaningful thing Charles and I built came from sacrifice, patience, and care. Somewhere along the way, certain people had stopped seeing that. They saw only the result: the house, the savings, the investments, the security. They saw the fruit without understanding the years spent planting the tree. Before going to bed, I received a text message from Derek. It was brief. He thanked me again for attending his birthday dinner and added a smiling emoji at the end. I stared at the message for several seconds before setting the phone aside. The words looked polite, perhaps even sincere. But after everything I had begun noticing, I could no longer judge people only by what they said. I had finally started paying attention to what they consistently did. The following week brought an unexpected conversation. It began on a quiet Tuesday afternoon while I was tending the roses near my front porch. The Texas sun was warm but not oppressive, and a light breeze moved through the trees. I was trimming a few branches when a familiar car pulled into my driveway. Emily stepped out carrying a backpack and a large water bottle. She had recently earned her driver's permit and seemed eager to use every opportunity to practice. After a quick hug, she followed me inside. We spent the next hour baking oatmeal cookies in the kitchen, something we had done together since she was a little girl. Unlike many teenagers, Emily paid attention. She noticed details. She listened carefully. As we waited for the cookies to cool, she sat at the kitchen table and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" she said. I nodded. She looked down at her hands. "Why does Dad always talk about money when the family gets together?" The question surprised me, not because it was inaccurate, but because it came from her. I chose my words carefully. "What makes you ask that?" Emily shrugged. "I do not know. It just seems like every conversation eventually becomes about investments, property, retirement, or inheritance. Sometimes it makes people uncomfortable." I remained silent for a few seconds. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the background. "Have you noticed that often?" I asked. She nodded. "More than once." Then she said something that stayed with me long after she left. "Grandpa Charles never talked that way." The observation was simple, honest, and impossible to dismiss. After Emily went home, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sun sink behind the trees. Her words echoed in my mind because they confirmed something I had already begun to understand. Children often notice truths adults work hard to ignore. Over the years, I had excused countless remarks from Derek. I told myself he was ambitious, practical, focused on providing for his family. But there was a difference between planning for the future and quietly counting other people's resources as though they already belonged to you. Later that evening, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of my attorney, Michael Harper. We had worked together for nearly 15 years. He was thorough, calm, and never wasted words. After exchanging pleasantries, he informed me that all the recent paperwork had been fully processed and securely filed. Nothing more was required. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet when I ended the call, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The decision was no longer theoretical. It was complete, permanent. Outside, darkness settled across the property. I turned off the kitchen lights and prepared for bed. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection and paused. The woman looking back seemed different from the one who had walked into Derek's birthday dinner weeks earlier. Not stronger, not colder, simply awake. For years, I had mistaken patience for obligation. I had believed enduring disrespect was the price of keeping peace. Now I was beginning to understand that peace built upon silence is not peace at all. It is merely postponement. And somewhere ahead, whether they realized it or not, the people around me were moving steadily toward a truth they would never see coming. About 2 weeks later, Rachel invited me to Sunday lunch at their house. The invitation sounded casual, but something in her voice suggested she genuinely wanted me there. I arrived shortly before noon carrying a homemade peach cobbler. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with neatly trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes. Rachel greeted me warmly at the door. Derek appeared moments later and offered a polite smile. If anyone had walked into the room that day, they would have seen a perfectly pleasant family gathering. The dining table was set with white plates and fresh flowers. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. Emily talked about school. Rachel discussed a project at work. Derek shared stories about a recent golf tournament. Everything appeared normal, yet I found myself observing more carefully than before. Small details revealed far more than words. Whenever the conversation drifted toward finances, Derek became noticeably more engaged. When Emily mentioned college applications, he immediately began discussing tuition costs and investment strategies. When Rachel talked about renovating part of their home, he launched into a lengthy explanation about property values and long-term equity. None of those topics were inappropriate by themselves. What caught my attention was the way his eyes occasionally shifted toward me while he spoke. It was subtle, brief, but impossible to miss once I noticed it. At one point, Rachel stepped into the kitchen to refill drinks. Emily excused herself to take a phone call. For a few moments, Derek and I sat alone at the table. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You have always been smart with money," he said. "Charles, too. Not many people manage things as well as you did." I thanked him politely. Then he continued, "That kind of planning creates opportunities for future generations." The statement sounded harmless. Perhaps it was intended to, but I could feel the meaning resting quietly beneath the surface. Future generations, opportunities, legacies. The words floated between us like pieces of a puzzle neither of us acknowledged directly. I simply nodded and took a sip of iced tea. A few minutes later, Rachel and Emily returned, and the conversation moved on. After lunch, we gathered in the living room. Family photographs covered the shelves. Several included Charles. Seeing his face reminded me of something he once told me years ago. We had been discussing a business dispute involving one of his colleagues. Charles listened carefully before saying, "Character reveals itself when people think the reward is already theirs." At the time, I thought it was an interesting observation. Now it felt like a warning I should have understood much sooner. Later that afternoon, as guests began drifting into different rooms, Emily joined me on the back patio. We watched birds gather near a feeder hanging from an oak tree. "Grandma," she said, softly, "do you ever miss Grandpa every day?" I smiled. "Every single day." She nodded thoughtfully. "I think he would be proud of you." The comment caught me off guard. I asked why she thought that. Emily shrugged. "Because you always stay kind even when people make it difficult." After I returned home that evening, I sat quietly in my study. The house was still. The air conditioner hummed softly in the background. I thought about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. Piece by piece, the picture had become clearer. The decision I made was never about money. It was about understanding the difference between being valued and being useful. And for the first time, I no longer confused the two. Summer arrived in full force across central Texas. Temperatures climbed past 90 degrees most afternoons, and the air carried that familiar stillness that settles over the countryside before sunset. During those weeks, I saw less of Rachel and Derek, but I heard plenty about them through ordinary family conversations. Emily stopped by occasionally after school. Rachel called every few days. Life moved forward, yet the more distance I had, the more clearly I could see things I had once overlooked. One evening, Rachel invited me to attend a neighborhood barbecue hosted by one of Derek's friends. I almost declined, but Emily convinced me to come. The gathering took place in a large backyard overlooking a small community lake. Children played near the water while adults gathered beneath shaded patios. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly. Shortly after arriving, I found a quiet seat near the edge of the yard. From there, I could observe without drawing attention to myself. Derek spent most of the afternoon moving from group to group, telling stories and making people laugh. He was charismatic when he wanted to be. That was one of the reasons it had taken me so long to understand him fully. Charming people often receive the benefit of the doubt. As the afternoon continued, conversations drifted toward real estate and retirement planning. Several homeowners discussed rising property values and future financial goals. Derek quickly became the center of the discussion. He spoke confidently about long-term wealth, legacy planning, and building security for future generations. Many of the comments sounded reasonable, but then he said something that caught my attention. With a grin, he remarked, "Sometimes the smartest investment is being born into the right family." Several people laughed. One man assumed he was joking. Another nodded in agreement. Derek laughed again and took a sip from his drink. The comment lasted only a moment before the conversation moved on, yet it revealed far more than he intended. Sitting there beneath the shade of an oak tree, I realized something important. Derek no longer viewed financial security as something to earn. He viewed certain future resources as expected, assumed, already counted. The confidence behind that assumption explained many things. Later that afternoon, Emily joined me near the lake. We watched a family of ducks move slowly across the water. After a few minutes, she glanced toward the crowd and lowered her voice. "Grandma, do you think people can become too focused on money?" she asked. I smiled gently. "Money is a tool," I replied. "The problem begins when people confuse the tool with the purpose." She considered that for a moment before nodding. On the drive home that evening, her question stayed with me. So did Derek's comment. For years, I had worried that changing my will might somehow be unfair. Perhaps I was overreacting. Perhaps I was being overly sensitive. Those doubts had lingered quietly in the back of my mind. But now they were disappearing. Not because Derek had done one terrible thing. It was because of the pattern, the assumptions, the entitlement hidden beneath casual remarks, the growing expectation that what belonged to someone else would eventually belong to him. When I pulled into my driveway that night, the sky was turning shades of purple and gold. I sat in my car for a few moments before going inside. The decision I had made weeks earlier felt more justified than ever. And somewhere not far away, Derek continued building plans around a future he believed was guaranteed, completely unaware that foundation had already vanished. The turning point arrived sooner than I expected. It happened on an ordinary Wednesday morning near the end of August. I was organizing paperwork in my study when my phone rang. The caller was Rachel. Her voice sounded strained, not frightened, but unsettled. She explained that she and Derek had been meeting with a financial advisor to discuss long-term planning. College expenses for Emily were approaching. They were considering future investments and retirement goals. None of that surprised me. What caught my attention was what came next. Rachel mentioned that Derek had become unusually frustrated during the meeting. Apparently, the advisor had asked a simple question about projected assets and expected future resources. According to Rachel, Derek had spoken with remarkable certainty about family wealth eventually becoming available. The advisor responded by reminding him that future inheritances should never be treated as guaranteed financial planning tools. Rachel laughed awkwardly while telling me the story, but something about it clearly bothered her. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. The conversation confirmed everything I had already suspected. Derek was not merely hoping for additional financial security someday. He had built assumptions around it. He had started treating possibilities as promises. A few days later, another unexpected development occurred. Michael Harper contacted me and asked if I would be available for a routine review meeting regarding several estate documents. Nothing unusual. We met at his office the following week. The building overlooked downtown Austin, and sunlight reflected from the glass towers outside his conference room window. As we reviewed the paperwork, Michael paused for a moment before speaking. "I want to confirm that you remain comfortable with all recent changes," he said. "Everything is finalized, but I always encourage clients to revisit important decisions after some time has passed." I appreciated the question. It was thoughtful and professional. I looked through the documents carefully. Then I closed the folder and nodded. "I am comfortable with every decision," I replied. Michael studied me for a moment and smiled. That is usually easier to say when the decision was made for the right reasons. On the drive home, I reflected on those words. The right reasons. Months earlier, I might have questioned myself. Now I did not. The decision had never been driven by anger. It had been driven by clarity. That weekend, Emily invited me to attend one of her school events. Families filled the auditorium once again. Parents chatted in the hallways. Students hurried between activities. During a break, I noticed Derek speaking with several other fathers near the entrance. I was too far away to hear everything, but I caught enough to understand the tone. He was discussing future plans again. Larger investments, bigger opportunities, long-term security. The confidence remained unchanged. Watching him from across the room, I experienced something unexpected. I no longer felt disappointment. I no longer felt resentment. Those emotions had gradually faded. In their place was acceptance. Derek continued building expectations around a future that existed only in his imagination. Meanwhile, reality had already moved in a different direction. The remarkable part was that he still had no idea. The foundation beneath those expectations had disappeared months ago, yet he continued standing upon it as confidently as ever. And somewhere ahead, A moment was approaching when assumptions would finally collide with truth. The moment arrived on a quiet afternoon in early October. I had just finished watering the flowers near my front porch when Rachel called. Her voice sounded different this time. There was hesitation in it. Confusion. She explained that she and Derek had recently met with an estate planning specialist recommended by one of his business associates. The purpose had been simple. They wanted to organize their own long-term financial documents and discuss future projections. During the conversation, the specialist repeated something similar to what their financial advisor had said months earlier. Future inheritances should never be treated as guaranteed assets. According to Rachel, the comment triggered a disagreement after they returned home. Derek insisted that some future outcomes were practically certain. Rachel disagreed. Listening to her, I remained calm. I offered no opinion. After all, there was nothing left to explain. The truth would reveal itself eventually without my assistance. A week later, I attended another family gathering. This one was smaller. Just Rachel, Derek, Emily, and me. We met at a local restaurant overlooking the Colorado River. The atmosphere was pleasant. Autumn had finally begun softening the Texas heat. The outdoor patio was comfortable, and a gentle breeze moved through the trees along the riverbank. Throughout dinner, I noticed something unusual. Derek seemed distracted. Not unhappy, just preoccupied. Several times he drifted into silence while others were speaking. At one point, he asked me whether I had updated any of my financial records recently. The question was casual enough to avoid suspicion, but its timing felt interesting. I smiled politely and told him that responsible adults should review important documents from time to time. He nodded slowly. For a brief moment, I thought I saw concern flash across his face. Then it disappeared. After dinner, we walked along the river path. Emily stayed close beside me while Rachel and Derek followed several steps behind. As we passed a row of benches overlooking the water, Emily squeezed my arm gently. "You seem happier lately," she said. The observation surprised me. "Do I?" I asked. She nodded. "You seem lighter." I thought about that for a moment. Perhaps she was right. For months, I had carried the weight of disappointment. Now that burden was fading. Acceptance had replaced it. Later that evening, after everyone returned home, I sat alone in my living room. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked steadily. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. I was reading when my phone vibrated with an incoming text message. It was from Derek. The message was unusually long. He thanked me for always supporting the family over the years. He mentioned how much he appreciated everything I had done. He even apologized if he had ever appeared insensitive. I read the message twice. The words were thoughtful, carefully written, yet something felt different. Not because the apology was insincere. I could not know his heart. What struck me was the timing. For years, genuine appreciation had been rare. Suddenly, it arrived all at once. I set the phone down and stared out the window into the darkness. Somewhere, pieces were beginning to move. Questions were forming. Assumptions were being challenged. And for the first time, Derek seemed to sense that the future he had counted on might not be as secure as he once believed. By November, the uncertainty that had been quietly growing around Derek finally reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. The change began with small questions. Then came careful conversations. Then came concern. One Saturday afternoon, Rachel called and asked if she could visit alone. When she arrived, we sat on the back porch overlooking the property Charles and I had loved for decades. The air was cool. Fallen leaves covered parts of the yard. For a while, we spoke about ordinary things. Emily's school activities, holiday plans, family traditions. Eventually, Rachel grew quiet. I could see that something weighed on her mind. After a long pause, she admitted that Derek had become increasingly anxious about future finances. Not because they were struggling. They were comfortable. Their mortgage was manageable. Their savings were healthy. Their careers were stable. Yet he seemed troubled by possibilities that existed years away. I listened without interrupting. Then Rachel asked a question that told me everything. "Mom, has something changed?" The words hung between us. I could have answered directly. Instead, I asked what made her wonder. Rachel looked down at her hands. She explained that over the past several months, Derek had become unusually focused on conversations about inheritance, estate planning, and future family assets. He had even started asking indirect questions about documents and legal arrangements. The realization seemed to trouble her. More importantly, it embarrassed her. For the first time, She appeared to see the situation from outside her own perspective. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "The most valuable thing your father ever left us was not money," I said. "It was character." Rachel's eyes filled with emotion. She nodded slowly. Neither of us mentioned Derek again that afternoon. A week later, I received another message from him. This one was even longer than the last. He thanked me for years of generosity. He apologized for moments when he may have seemed ungrateful. He spoke about family, respect, and appreciation. The words were thoughtful. Perhaps some were sincere. But what struck me most was how different they were from the behavior that had come before them. Respect that appears only when something might be lost rarely feels the same as respect that existed from the beginning. As Thanksgiving approached, our family gathered once again. The atmosphere was pleasant. Emily laughed often. Rachel seemed more reflective than usual. Derek was polite, very polite. Throughout the evening, I watched everyone around the table and felt an unexpected sense of peace. Months earlier, I thought this story was about a will. I thought it was about money. I was wrong. It was about recognizing the difference between being loved and being valued for what you can provide. It was about understanding that kindness should never require self-sacrifice without limits. Most of all, it was about learning that protecting your dignity is not an act of cruelty. As dinner ended and everyone prepared to leave, Emily hugged me tightly and thanked me for another wonderful holiday. Watching her walk toward the car beside her parents, I smiled. The future I wanted to support had never been about rewarding entitlement. It was about encouraging character, gratitude, and integrity. Long before anyone else understood it, that was the future I had chosen. And in the end, a gift worth less than $30 revealed a truth worth far more than $2 million.